We have Ali back with us, and we also have Kieran Flanagan, who is, hi Ali, Kieran Flanagan, who's VP of Marketing with HubSpot. Now, just to bring Kieran into the conversation, I know, Kieran, that remote work, which Ali was talking about, is something close to your heart. I've heard you speak about it and how it's even helped your own life. And I know HubSpot, we're already very much moving toward having a large remote workforce. Can you tell our attendees more? And then I'll bring Ali back in, please.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of reasons I love remote work. I think it's incredible to live in a time where your career isn't defined by your zip code. And I think if you work in certain industries, there's certain cities you're meant to live in to have the career you want. And I've certainly been offered roles single kind of one of those cities, and for one reason or another I haven't wanted to move. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do a role that's usually based in the States and kind of grow out this group of 70 plus marketers who are distributed across the globe and do it all from where I wanted to live in a nice place in Dublin. And so that's one of the reasons. I think for companies, it also just allows them to hire talent, retain talent. So a lot of people, when they work in companies, due to life changes, they want to move, and it's really difficult for companies to retain those people, and they have to kind of just go and usually lose them. And I think in this world, that person has more flexibility and the company has more flexibility to keep the best people within that company. And the other reason I love remote work is because it just, and this is kind of less to do about the work aspect, it really kind of helps to better flow money through all of these other kind of cities and towns that don't have these kind of giant work hubs. And so people who work in these jobs can go and live in these towns and live in these cities and earn this money and spend it through those local economies. And I just think that is the better thing for the world.
Thanks, Kieran. And to both Ali and Kieran, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how this move toward remote could truly expand career opportunities for some of our attendees. You know, for those who may not normally fit in an office, who, as you mentioned, are challenged geographically, but by many other things like autism, you name it. To both of you, whoever wants to take that first. Ali, we start.
I can pick it up.
Sorry, Kieran.
Yeah, it's you know, the autism spectrum is a really good example of something that helps. If we think more expansively, there are folks who work really well in an office. They thrive off of interpersonal interaction. A lot of their success at work is driven by charisma. We see a lot of that within sales team, within leadership. But for every one of those people, we also have introverts. We have folks who do a lot of heads down, deep focus work. Those are the ones who have been complaining about the open office plan for years and years and years. And so that's one aspect, which is not everybody works well does their best work in an office. And I think the other aspect, when you talk about geographical challenges, it's not just folks living in remote parts of our countries that are away from our offices, but it's also people living in the outskirts of our cities. And one thing we see in the US, I'm not sure if this is as prevalent in Ireland, but the people who tend to make the least amount of money are the ones who have to live on the fringes of our expensive cities. So they're the ones who, when they have a job in the center of the city, pay, you know, more just in terms of time, in terms of money to get to and from work. So they are, you know, basically double punished for making less money. The fact that they don't have to commute actually gives them a lot more opportunity. So I think that there's a ton for us to lean into here.
Thanks, Ali. And Kieran?
Yeah, I think if, you know, your career shouldn't be defined by your geography, it also shouldn't be defined by the work environment that you have to kind of adhere to, that everyone has to work within the same way. I think people work in different environments better. Some environments are suited to other people versus, you know, different other environments. People work better at certain times in the day. Like, that is a real thing. People have different body clocks. And I think for me, why I love remote work is it just gives people the flexibility to create an environment, whether that is 1 day a week working remote, that is just better suited to them, or 4 days a week, or whatever that kind of version of that is for each and every person. It just helps them to create the environment through which that they can better do their work, and they feel more empowered to do their best work and create that environment.
Fantastic. And I mean, one thing that many people have mentioned to me, one of the big challenges of the current time is about recruiting and onboarding remotely. Ali touched on it there, but just the challenges and the opportunities as far as Slack and HubSpot are concerned when it comes to recruiting and onboarding. Again, Ali, do you want to start?
Sure. Initially, it was really tactical. So it was, how do we move all of our recruiting operations to Zoom? How do we, what do we need to change about those operations? And then, of course, you think about onboarding, which is, how do we take this practice of flying everybody into San Francisco, sitting them down with a brand new laptop, walking them through, facilitating conversations and meetings and lunches? How do we move all of that to people's homes? So that was the immediate tactical challenge. And I think for all of us, it's something, we closed our offices on March 5th. So it's something that we just had to figure out, and we had, basically 2 weeks in March to do it. But then there's the ongoing challenge. And it's, so we run an onboarding survey for their first week, their first 30 days, and their first 90 days, how's it going, what's going well, what isn't. And the things, so our employees are still saying this company is great, onboarding was excellent, I left my coworkers, I'm feeling really productive after their first 90 days. They're saying that they wish they could meet people in person, but they understand. And I think we worry, our concerns about this are really valid because it's just different. In all the data I'm seeing in terms of people coming in, feeling welcomed, making connections and being productive, we just don't have any data to support that it's a problem. And that's been a really interesting dynamic to me. Is it are we missing something, or is it actually just going better than we anticipated it would?
And Kieran, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the way we think about this is we're kind of, I don't think it's one or the other. And I think what we're betting on is kind of hybrid being the future, where you can give people the flexibility to kind of, again, do the work in the way and the environment that they want to do it. For us, we have this culture code, and we have this belief that the results matter a lot more to us versus where you actually produce them. And when you go to HubSpot, you'll see most of our roles are actually remote, and you can kind of decide to be within the office, or you can decide to be completely remote, or you can decide to be a mixture of those two things. In terms of onboarding, when we think about our culture and just how we onboard people, for us, work isn't a place, right? It's part of the kind of company fabric. The company fabric isn't in that office. The company fabric is the people within that company and the mission the company have. And we have a really firm belief that to experience that culture, you don't need to be in the office, and you can actually be anywhere within the world working for HubSpot and actually experience that culture. So when we think about onboarding, you can have the option to actually come into the office and spend some time in there and being onboarded. But we've also onboarded people completely remotely, and the NPS for those and how people feel about that experience has actually been very, very high. And of course, we're kind of going through this this situation now where most people are experiencing remote for the very first time. And for a lot of people, I think that they're going to see that, wow, there's a lot I enjoy about this experience, but I want to have some amount of time in the office. For others, they're going to say, I just can't wait to get back in the office. That's where I do my best work. And for others, it's probably been a life-changing experience where they figured out how they can fit their life perfectly around their work and not have to be in the office to do that.
Fantastic. It's funny what you're talking about there, because I met one of my newest colleagues there for the very first time today, and I'm having great fun watching her run by about 10 meters away in the distance, but it's still lovely to meet in person. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Can I chat to you further about leading a remote or a distributed team? As well as for teams, it's been a challenging time for many team leaders. I'm meeting people who are finding that loss of control hasn't sat very well with them. And I just love your advice and thoughts for people who are not, very happily and comfortably moving into that area.
It's hard for everybody. Our research shows a couple of things. So number one, back to Kieran's point, somewhere between 10 to 15% of your employees want to go back to the office full time. That's it. The rest of your employees want to go back some amount of time, usually 2 to 3 days a week, or never. They want to go fully remote. And the breakdown there is 10 to 15%, and then you have a big chunk of 65 to 70%, and the rest are fully remote. And we'll see how that shifts over time. In terms of leading remote teams, number one is to remember that most people are in a situation that they are, closer to okay with than we might think because we were so used to the office. And the second thing our research shows is that folks who are really high up in an organization are doing okay. It's the middle management layer and the line management layers that are really, really having a hard time with loss of control. And this is just kind of, one of the struggles has always been the loss of control downwards. Like, you are executing a strategy that was put forth for you, but now they also are being squeezed against the loss of control upwards because their teams are working very differently. And when you think about those dynamics and you think about who in your company is actually having the hardest time leading remotely, that's where I really want to focus my time, is supporting those managers, because they're the ones talking to the vast majority of my department. So one of the tricks there is to help them understand like what is and is not within their control. Like, they can definitely point their employees towards our mental health resources, for example, but we don't expect them to step in the shoes of being a therapist. They're not a trained one. They can definitely, we need them to switch to a method of managing by work output rather than supervision. And these are things that people can massage, but it's important for us to remember that literally none of us can control everything right now. We never could, but our reins of control we have so fewer of them than we used to. So what we're leaning into a lot more now is communications. It's just much, much more important than it ever was. One thing you saw in my talk, no slides, this has been really important for our employee base and for my team. I just talk to them. And these conversations, just looking into the camera, just talking, these foster real feelings of connection and actually kind of tighten those bonds between leadership and their teams.
Yeah, it's so true. Kieran, your own thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've been kind of leading remotely from 2016, and there's been a couple of eye-opening things that I've learned in terms of management, being a remote leader or a leader of remote teams versus when I used to do this in an office. And just going through it with my kind of directors and managers who are also going through that shift of kind of managing remote teams. I think one of the things that typically happens to a company when they start to manage remotely and that manager, they kind of fall into the trap of micromanaging, because it's inherently built into us that we think about work being done and part of us knowing it's being done is being able to see the people who are doing it. And that is a hard thing for people to kind of make that mental shift. And Ali talked to it there, and I think that's a really great point, which is changing people's perception that the value of the work is on the output, not on the location you're doing it. And to do that, you have to build some amount of trust within the people on your team in terms of that they're actually doing those things, and build an operating model so you have good feedback loops to make sure that you are confident they're doing the things you think you need them to do. You also need to recognize that people just have different communication styles. And this isn't a function of being remote or not being remote, but I think remote emphasizes it. I used to call it, when I started to kind of be part of the leadership team in HubSpot and be kind of one of the only people who were remote, I used to call it the kind of goldfish face, because you would be on the screen and you're trying to get a word in edgeways, and you're kind of opening your mouth and closing your mouth and opening your mouth, and you can never actually get your point across because you're the person on the screen. And I think what managers and leaders should do is think more about, how do I be a great facilitator, right? In that meetings, how do I ensure that I am not the person always giving my point of view and talking about what I would do, but actually how do I create an environment where I can be a facilitator and bring others into the conversation, including all of the people who are remote. And that isn't unique to remote. You should do that anyway, because people have different communication styles, but I just think remote enhances that and kind of emphasizes it more. The other part, just in terms about communication, the other thing I really think that you need to think through is how do people do their best work? And again, that is applicable to remote, because a lot of what we've been taught is to have these meetings and then to ask people questions on the spot within those meetings and try to come up with solutions there and then. And there's really great people who do not work that way. They need to be thoughtful. They need to actually think through a problem. And I think one of the things remote helps you to do is have better business processes and communication kind of operating models to facilitate all of the different people who work for your company. So one of the things that we do is we generally try to solve problems through what we call memos. We create 4 to 6 page document around a problem, and we allow people to go back and forth in that document so everyone can actually be thoughtful about that problem. One of the other things I'll just leave people with is I think it helps to be a really transparent company, especially when you go remote. When you're in office, most decisions seem to get made over these kind of water cooler moments, or when you're kind of sitting beside someone's desk, and all of these decisions get made, and people aren't really sure, how they were made, or they were part of the process. And that again gets exasperated in a remote environment where people are unsure of how they can be part of this decision-making process. And I think you want to really try to lean into being transparent and over-communicate. And I think that's what we try to do in HubSpot.
Kieran and Ali, would you believe it? We're already over time. That absolutely flew by. It was amazing having you both with us. And I have to say, I learned a lot from what you've just told us there. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.